afternoon. Today I invited Jon Wilson, a famous professor of King College, UK. I am going to discuss about his new book that is coming soon.
Soonish.
Trying to sum up your idea about your book that you mentioned in your biography here. So, why you are writing this research project? Because you have many options. You can write anything across the globe. Why you are interested in Bangladeshi history?
So the new book is not just on Bangladesh. It's a global history of the nation state. But I'm back in Bangladesh because this is where my research career started. My first work was on East Bengal, and I think it's a really interesting place to think about global history from. Somewhere that's shaped by global forces and yet has its own power and its own agency, if you like, to some degree create its own destiny. And I think it's fascinating, particularly to be thinking about the history of the nation state in a place that developed, had a kind of liberation war to create a nation state at I guess a relatively late point in time in the 1970s. So and where kind of nationalism, ideas about nationality are still very, very important.
Yeah, it is good. Sounds good, and I like your project. But I have interest about the issue that you raised in your last presentation. That is about chaos. So you mentioned out of chaos, a global history of the rise and fall of the nation state.
Yeah.
So not only in this book title, but also you wrote another book, another article, and all three cases you mentioned the term chaos. Why chaos?
So I think we have a tendency as historians and as people thinking about politics to assume that politics occurs in this ordered, rational way. So either people are acting out ideologies that are very well stable and well formed, or they're working to further particular kind of stable interests. And I just think, partly someone who's been involved in politics, been a political activist and has been close to politicians, recognizing that that's just not how politics happens. It's not how people think about practically exercise political power, and it's not how institutions work. And I think that a lot of the time we live in complex, plural, often quite conflictual, if you like, societies. And what political leaders and what political institutions are trying to do is to try to make sense of tension, conflict, and chaos. And I'm interested, I suppose, and it's something I've been interested in throughout my research career, is how political institutions and political leaders try and impose some kind of order for themselves, to make meaning for themselves, but also to project a sense of order onto that kind of chaos. I suppose I think that there's something quite I suppose in a way maybe it comes from Nietzsche or someone, I don't know, but the idea that kind of fundamentally there's chaos everywhere, and that human existence is about trying to kind of impose order on that. Maybe that's going too far, but certainly in terms of thinking about 20th century politics, that chaos has been something that political leaders have constantly felt threatened by and have constantly tried to develop ways to push away.
It is good, I think, that you mention a new term for writing South Asian history, and it is very meaningful with the context. I think so. But I would like to know, you mentioned Bangladesh and the global history of the nation state in your last presentation that was organized by the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh. Why you would like to connect Bangladesh with the global history?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's just because I'm very interested in Bangladesh, and it's where, as I said, it's where I sort of began my research career. I'm in the National Archives, which is where a lot of the sources for my first research project were. So it's somewhere that I always think about, always go back to. But I think that there's something particularly interesting about the history of Bangladesh in that it became a nation state, if you like, out of another nation state, or out of a state that was at least claiming to be a nation state, although there's extraordinary inequality within the two wings of Pakistan. And so I think that, if you like, the particularity of Bangladesh allows you to explore, to unravel some of the things that maybe we don't properly understand about the kind of post-war political order. How could you have this nation state that had two wings that broke up so quickly? I think if you like, not just seeing Pakistan as an aberration, but actually saying, hold on a minute, this is a state that people thought was viable, and for a while it maybe was viable. What does that mean? How do we take that seriously? How do we need to rethink the history of the nation state or the history of the process that led to the nation state to make sense of this kind of otherwise quite strange kind of polity? So I think thinking about the global from this local or regional perspective sort of gives you this other angle that forces you to actually rethink things potentially quite fundamentally.
I read your booklet that you printed for the presentation, and from first page to last page.
Thank you.
But I did not find any word related to the comparative history.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that your project is very much related to the field of comparative history rather than the global history. What do you think?
So what's the difference? How do you define the difference?
I think global history is more wide than comparative history.
Sure.
If you know the books of Mahat Block,
sure.
Historian's Craft. If you read the book, you know what is the global history, the idea of global history, and what is the idea of comparative history. So I think that it is very different idea. If you want to compare between the global idea of global history and the idea of comparative history, it is not the same.
Sure.
What do you think?
So I think I'm doing global history, not comparative history. I deliberately don't talk about comparative history because I think that the problem, if you like, with comparative history is it takes for granted what the units are that you're comparing, right? So actually often comparative history ends up, I think, consolidating a kind of nation-state-centeredness, if you like. So you end up with a view that you compare this nation with this nation with this nation. And so the worst kind of comparative history are people like Francis Fukuyama in The Origins of Modern Political Order, for example, where you just get this, almost like league table of comparing different aspects of different societies. And I think the problem that comparative history has, and the reason why I'm not a comparative historian, is that actually there is a process of global interconnection, that things are happening in a complicated way on a global scale at the same time. And that's so to say, I don't think I'm a comparative historian, for example, about the creation of Pakistan, because what I'm trying to say is that actually Pakistan becomes a nation state as local forces operate, but those local forces are constantly connecting to broader global forces, and it's within institutions such as the United Nations that actually you get a sense of the nation state emerging as a kind of generic category. So I think the reason why I think you might not see me as a global historian is that I'm not just interested in the history of globalization and what we might see as the most superficial forms of global connection, because I think actually the ways in which societies are divided from each other often occur according to global norms, if you see what I mean. The nation state, or say, for example, national statistics, which are all about the separateness of different nation states, or even national customs regimes, which are all about stopping the flow of goods, limiting the flow of goods between different nations. These all occur in a global context as part of a global conversation, and often based on global forms. So national statistics are produced according to the same categories across the world, and yet actually they're very much about the separateness of different nation states. So I think that's why people might look at my work and think, I'm not writing global history, because usually global history is all about looking at, the flow of global goods, the way in which societies are interconnected, etc. And I think I'm not the only historian to say this now, but I think actually we need a different kind of global history, which is not just about global interconnection, but about global, global context, the global context for the creation of nation states and local societies.
I see you mention it or noticed about the Sheikh Mujibur Rahman speech.
In the United Nations.
Yes. You quoted, "We no longer want to live in a colony."
Oh, this is an earlier speech in 1972.
Put in it February 1971.
71. So,
do you think that Pakistan ruled over Bangladesh as colonial ruler?
No, I think I understand why that rhetoric's used. It's politically important. It politically makes absolute sense. It's an easy frame of reference for people to understand, and maybe it's the nearest frame of reference. But I think it's important to be specific about the kinds of power that it exists. And I think that there was oppression, there was inequality, there was certainly injustice. But I'm not convinced that the particular model that you see of, if you like, inequality, etc., it makes sense to kind of refer to Pakistan as in terms of a colonial model. I think actually, to be honest, I don't like the category of colonial at all. I think that you need to be more specific about the forms of power and so forth that are implied. I mean, I think when you talk about colonial, I think normally you're talking about resource extraction. You're talking about sort of the occupation of a group of people, and then the creation of plantations, etc., etc. And that's not a particular mode of exploitation, if you like, that was occurring in Pakistan. So, but I think for Mujib, I mean, if I was Mujib in that context, I would have used that word, because it's I'm speaking as a historian, not as a politician. I think as a politician, it makes sense, because it's an easy frame of reference for people to understand, and makes perfect sense.
So, what do you mean by colonial ruler? In particular, if I would like to know about the British rule of India, you refer that British ruler was a colonial ruler. In your presentation, you have no disagreement with the historian.
I think there's a slip. I think there's a slip. I'm not sure. I'm not that comfortable even with that term. I think I would talk about empire rather than colony, actually. But I mean, so I wouldn't really want to talk about. There are some instances where the British are very much engaged in in colonialism in that sense, But I think that colonialism, a colony, is a place where a population comes and settles and then exploits and creates, and that's not what happened in British India. The kind of weakness of the poverty of that the British created in India came actually because people often didn't settle. They were in India very quickly, and they came back. So that word colonial, I'm not sure I'd even use necessarily for India, but I'm being very particular about these terms because I want to create these separate distinctions. I'm not by any way denigrating the kind of inequality, etc., that existed, that the British presided over.
You know about the Mughal rule in India. So historians also claimed that Mughal ruler was a colonial ruler. On the other hand, many historians claim that Mughal rule like a homogeneous rule. But I would like to know, how do you differ the British rule in India and the Mughal rule in India? Because if you want to claim that Mughal Empire, Mughal was established an empire. Similarly, if you want to claim that British ruled as empire, so how can you use the term empire for both cases?
Because empire means so many different kinds of things. I mean, I think I would define an empire as simply as a state that is multinational that has, a state in which there are multiple territories governed by one sovereign, and where you have one group of people who are dominant. So, in the Mughal Empire, you have a sort of Persian ruling class who are dominant, and the British Empire, obviously, you have the British, British officials. So, but actually, that's a very, very broad definition, right? There are very different ways in which that sort of ruling class can govern. So, and I think there's lots of differences between how the British and the Mughals ruled. So they both were people coming from somewhere else, who came and then created a state. But the British, what's important about the British rule is that every individual British officer wanted to leave. There's a tiny, tiny number who settle. Some do, but very, very small amount does. So these are people who, if you like, it's a sojourning empire, if you like to use that word. They're people who come for 10, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years, and then their ambition always is to move back to Britain. So they've always got their eye on Britain. They haven't, fundamentally, the British in India don't have their eye on India. They're kind of impatient to get through their business and then often to retreat into their own, British spaces in India and then eventually to go home. And I think that creates this very aloof, distant kind of government. My first book was called The Domination of Strangers, and I think that sense in which the British always see themselves as strangers to India is very, very important, and it feeds into, I don't think they came necessarily with ideas about racial difference, but those ideas of racial difference then developed from that kind of estranged kind of approach. The Mughal Empire is different because the Mughals were trying to build a state that endured. They saw themselves as rulers who certainly were imposing power, but they were trying to just expand their polity, and there's this kind of expansionist dynamic that is all about trying to kind of expand Mughal sovereignty in a way that actually involved, to some degree, people's settlement. It involved kind of people living and building relationships with the local society and creating a kind of in some senses a much stronger, more enduring power base. And I think what's important there is the fact that the Mughal Empire was built through negotiating deals with local rulers. That's the key. In a way that sometimes the British did, but actually then that changed, and they simply governed themselves because of that sort of dynamic of estrangement, if you like, that I'm talking about. So whereas the Mughal Empire kind of expanded through doing deals, kind of negotiating treaties and negotiating more than treaties with local rulers who then were incorporated into the Mughal Empire as sort of as officers. So the key difference because of that is that there is this kind of cultural fusion, and I think that's the difference, right? That you have this complicated sort of syncretic, if you like, cultural forms that emerge that's kind of in which the Mughals and kind of different Indian culture kind of sort of creates this sort of fused forms in a way that I think the British always kept themselves separate. So English culture, if you like, is that of course its influences India too, but there's a much starker separation that remains, I think.
I see. It is convincing. I think the historian will critique your opinion in the future. But I would like to know, you noticed that it is liberation as both the creation of a new nation state and a rebellion against the world order of nation states. You means when Bangladesh independent in 1971, it means it revolted against the world order of nation states. How?
Well, because I think because Bangladesh is a nation state. It creates itself as a nation state, of course. But at the same time, it's emerges in this kind of global campaign, and everyone. I mean, of course, I think it's what's happening here that matters the most. But there's a global discussion in which what matters is if you like, I think the humanity rather than the nationality of the people who are liberated, and that's true in the language around liberation. It's not just Bangladesh is not just about a nation, a political community that needs to be free, but also people not as human beings, as human beings who should possess human rights. And And that's, you know, and if you, that kind of, that's a really important force within the kind of discussion. So you know, so look at Mujib's speeches and comments. You know, he talks about in the nation. He talks about the need for our people to be liberated. But he also talks about he also says, you know, Amra Bacha. You know, so if I get it right, we want to survive. You know, so it's something about much more basic than, you know, a political community kind of. It's about survival as individuals, wanting to survive as human beings, as kind of, if you like, bare humanity almost. And I think that's and I think what's very interesting in the way in which Bangladesh is a leader within global discussions of things like human rights often, you know, kind of certainly within the kind of language and that kind of stuff. And so it becomes a kind of repository and a force, I think, for thinking about you know, individuals not just as members of a nation state, but also as kind of as the recipients of global concern, aid, welfare, etc. And you see that within the, if you like, the global NGO regime that kind of emerges, which is about, you know, Bangladesh, which doesn't really engage with, or it didn't, and I think it's over now, that regime actually. But you know, I think we're living in a different moment. But and the nation state is back. But you know, that kind of global NGO developmental set of ideas was almost trying to bypass the nation state, and was about engaging with, you know, the international community, engaging with Bangladeshis as you know, as individuals, as global subjects, rather than as kind of national citizens. So, but I think it's important. My point is, I mean, I'm not the only person to make that argument. Faisal Devji makes that argument, for example. But I think the point is, you need to see that Bangladesh is very much both, right? So the nation state is incredibly powerful, you know, as a force. Nationalism is incredibly powerful as a force, but it's contradicted by this other thing, and I think both exist at the same time.
I see, but in this case, I think the Bangladeshi historians will, in many cases, explain differently.
They would emphasize
this issue.
They would emphasize the nation state.
Yes, I think.
Yeah, and I see why people do that. You know, nationalism is hardwired into university history departments, mine included, you know, in a way. So, you know, and I get that, and I think it's important, and that perspective is important. But I think there is a more global context that's, you know, as I say, maybe it's not so important now, but certainly in the 90s and well, you know, from the 70s, 80s, 90s to some degree, matters as well. So I'd ask those historians of Bangladesh to kind of to sort of slightly look at it more broadly as well, and think about not just trying to explain the emergence of the nation state, but trying to explain some of the kind of characteristics of political society in Bangladesh as well. So, but I think that, you know, the question of the nation state is crucial. It remains important, and that's, you know, it's not just that kind of global subject.
The issue of sovereignty,
sure,
that you very much emphasis in your write-up.
Yeah.
Why sovereignty is important for the nation state?
Sure. Because it's the idea of power, right? It's the idea of ultimate power, and I guess politics is fundamentally about power, but it's an idea of power which is about legitimate power, about authority, and the ultimate idea of legitimate authority. That's a tautology, and so I think, you know, it's the way in which you know, societies talk about kind of where power fundamentally lies, and I think it's the concept, if you like, that the world uses to talk about where power ultimately lies. You know, we struggle to think about international power without talking about that, without that concept of sovereignty. And, you know, it's interesting that, you know, this concept isn't here now, but at various points people have talked about the necessity of a world state because, you know, and a global sovereign almost, etc. So I think that there's something fundamental about you know, that it's become the key concept really for thinking about global politics and national politics, you know, over the last you know, 100 years or whatever. So it's kind of unavoidable in that sense.
Yeah, it is. I think I will be agree with you if you explain this issue more. In particular, you argue that sovereignty only exists if it is recognized by other states.
Yeah.
Why recognition is vital
Yeah.
for the nation state.
Yeah, because a nation state is a member of a global community, and that's the point. One of the key things I'm trying to make. A nation state, everything about a nation state is about its in some senses implicitly is about its relationship with the world outside, right? So it's about telling a national story different from other parts of the world. It's about having a national economy that is separate or has a certain kind of relationship with what's going on outside. Not being dominated by other powers, for example. That's key to that idea of the national economy. So the idea of national culture, again, about difference and about with others. So everything about nation statehood, if you like, has to do with difference, kind of separation or a relationship, say. So with other societies. So I think the nation state is a necessarily, if you like, relational thing. It can't exist on its own. And the way and in the global context, the way that we recognise that is through the recognition of the sovereignty of different nation states. I think it's of course it's complicated, right? So if you like, in theory, we live in a world, and since the 1950s or whatever, we've lived in a world of identical nation states that are each kind of peace. You see this within the United Nations Charter and its discussions, but each of them are peace-loving, each stably exists within particular borders, each are recognised by every state. But that's not how things are, because there are states that are created through conflict that in which different societies take different sides on, and then some of them are recognised and others aren't, and some of those conflicts continue. So obvious examples: Israel and Palestine and Taiwan. They're states that are not recognised by all states. But I think the point is that and most states, of course, are recognised by all states. But there are some that are not. And those states, though, they function as nation states more or less because they're able to do nation-state-like things. They have national borders, they have national statistics, they have a relationship with, they can trade with other societies. They have national currencies and so forth. It's not essential that all states are recognised by all other states. It's possible for states to be recognised by a significant, powerful enough group of states. The reason why Israel exists as a nation state, or it came into existence as a nation state on that global scale, is because it was recognised first by the Soviet Union and then by the US. In fact, the Soviet Union recognised Israel before the US. And that was crucial, having been recognised by both of the Cold War powers. Then created this crucial sort of thing. But I think it's important not to get sidetracked, if you like, by the exceptions, to not recognise that there is this kind of broader assumption that kind of states are recognised by other states.
In South Asia, in particular in Bangladesh, everyday life, if you analyze the people's everyday life, you will find that religion, in particular Islam, is playing a pivotal role in their life.
Sure.
But you do not mention anything about the Islam to form a nation state, the role of Islam to form a nation state or role of religion.
Sure.
How do you think about this issue?
I mean, obviously, kind of religion matters in the creation of Pakistan and then Bangladesh, because Pakistan was created as a state for India's Muslims. I think, though, for a lot of, or at least for the leading leaders of the creation of Pakistan, Islam was a kind of was a cultural, social, and, if you like, political category rather than a religious category. So famously, Jinnah was not a non-believer, and so etc. So I think actually that I think there's a kind of and this is perhaps an outlandish claim, but I think there's kind of an essential secularism about the post-war nation state, right? And that doesn't, that's a crazy thing to say because you have states that have a very strong religious identity. But I think that the forms of religious politics that have thrived, so whether it's in India or wherever else, are ones that kind of secularize religion and turn it into and this is an argument of someone like my colleague Humar Iqtidar makes, for example, and turn it into a kind of into a way of thinking about political power and political identity. And that's certainly, you look at Jamaat and you look at Maududi and so forth. That's what Maududi does. Maududi kind of, if you like, secularizes Islam and makes it into a political ideology, which is on a par with communism. In fact, he's trying to combat communism by making Islam into something like that. So there's a way in which kind of in this sort of political field, religion changes its character, or at least kind of becomes something that is kind of secularized in a certain sense, and connects to that idea of sovereignty. I don't think there's an idea of sovereignty within religion. You can't read Islam or any kind of religion and find ideas about political sovereignty within them. But it's this fusion is made, so actually people can make arguments about national sovereignty, as now obviously the BJP does, relating to religion. And I think that's kind of if you like, this kind of secularization of religion. Now, BJP supporters would, completely disagree with that, and they do, and they argue with me and shout at me very loudly, But I think that's right. But I think religion as religious practice, in just everyday religion, then I think becomes something that has a very complicated relationship with the nation state. It's not an easy relationship necessarily. Sometimes it motivates people to support certain kinds of religious rhetoric, and other times it doesn't. I think here in Bangladesh, the really interesting case is, Hafazat, right? So which has a at least the last I checked, it has kind of had been connected to people who've supported very small political parties, maybe, but it's not. It doesn't see itself as it wants to influence the political debate, but it doesn't want to seize political power. It wants to be a kind of force in the background of it, as sort of like a fairly sort of conservative, pious group of Muslims want to kind of make society in their image, but they're not interested in political power, and so that's interesting. I think that there are forms of religious action, if you like, which don't want to, which are not so woven into kind of political language and political rhetoric, and I think that's very interesting. So I do think there is kind of a separation between religion and religious religious practice and so forth, and the politics of the state, and sometimes that gets connected in complicated ways.
Is India a nation state?
So I don't want to get in. I'm not a political scientist, and I'm a historian, and I don't want to get into the job of deciding which states are nation states and which aren't. What I'm interested in doing is looking at how people at various points in time understand India. Okay, and I think so. In that context, I could see why people would say India isn't a nation state, but I think that what's interesting is the process by which a lot of from very complicated set of arguments about the relationship between nationhood and self-determination and so forth that existed in 1947. Indian political discourse is all about India as a nation state, and it was all about what that means and how that's defined. And there are very different arguments about what India's nation statehood actually is and what its kind of commonality is. So in that sense, it's certainly been seen as a nation state by many different strands of kind of Indian opinion, etc. And that's the kind of important for me as a historian. That's the important question, I think.
I'm interested to know about the issue of military.
Sure.
Does nation state need a strong military in order to survive?
No, but it's very peculiar. But it's very unusual for it not to have a strong military. I think there are, as I said, the nation state is something that always exists in an international framework, in a global framework. I think, in the way in which I see it, and there are cases where international relations are such that enable a nation state to exist and to build and to grow with secure in its borders without a sense of needing to have military. So the obvious examples are Japan and Germany after the Second World War, which kind of rebuild themselves very much as nation states with very limited ambitions. That's the point they have. They're as opposed to the regimes that had preceded the Second World War, they're comfortable within their boundaries. Japan shrinks back to the islands of Japan and so forth, and Germany the same. And both of them don't have armies; they have defense forces, etc. And so they survive without that. Although things have changed. I think the norm, the generality though, is obviously for the military to be important within nation states because. The nation state emerged, as I said, in this kind of chaotic moment, and one of the key things there is that sense of international antagonism and conflict, and it needed to kind of define borders and then protect its borders. So there's a kind of logic to the military then becoming important and then getting involved in becoming really important to state power. So yes, I think generally, usually the military is fundamentally bound up with how we think about nation states, but it doesn't need to be like that, and there are instances where it's not like that.
I agree with you many cases, but I think in order to secure his internal and external border, the nation state needs a strong military in not only the world context but also in the South Asian context, because that, for instance, Pakistan, many cases Pakistan and India involved or many times. So without military, how can Pakistan survive?
Exactly. That's right. Because of the international context it's involved in. Now, before Pakistan was created, the Pakistan leaders, thought that there was going to be a much more peaceful regional and global context. So they imagined that Pakistan didn't need to have a strong military. But yeah, as you say, in fact, that sort of context didn't come into existence. And so Pakistan saw that its survival required strong military. So absolutely right. So that's why in most cases, I think, a state needs, nation state and the military are essential. And because as I said, nation state is about sovereignty, and sovereignty is fundamentally about legitimate power, and power at some level requires force to at least prevent other rival powers from coming in and dominating.
I think you are right. I understand your explanation, and it is very convincing to me. I would like to know about the Bangladeshi National Archive. So you noticed that the Bangladesh National Archive is one of the best archives across the globe. But Bangladeshi historians frequently claim that they are unable to collect data from Bangladesh, from South Asian archive. So how do you think that this archive is one of the best archive in the world?
So firstly, I'm astonished by the fact that there are historians of modern South Asia, modern Bangladesh, who don't use the archive, right? And people just don't know, and that's here, actually, in this country, and that is absolutely shocking, I have to say. But many scholars do use the archive brilliantly, but there are some who don't, I can't explain that. So but why do I say it's so good? Because it has it's good about certain things, right? So it's an archive, it's a government archive, it's an archive of the state, and if you want to look at other organizations, non-state, there are private papers in the National Library which are really helpful, and of many leaders, etc., and business organizations and so forth, and that's great. But I mean, as an archive about the kind of thing I'm interested in, which is kind of political power at all its levels, the national archives are fantastic. And they're fantastic because they have records at a much more local level than any other archive I know in South Asia, any other national archive in South Asia, right? So, and the reason why is because the archivists have gone around local district record rooms, municipal record rooms, and collected materials in a way that I have not seen happen in any other archive, certainly not in South Asia. And so that process of archive acquisition, where the Chittagong district record room is here, right? So the Rangpur district record room is in this building, and that's incredible. It means that you don't need to negotiate with lots of local political forces, travel, etc., from Dhaka, to go and look at these kind of documents. And so you've got things like basically the whole Borishal town municipal corporation archives are here, which is incredible. So you have records on the personnel files of sweepers, kind of that level of detail about what's going on. So you can really get a fantastic sense of what's going on at the most kind of granular local level for the places that are covered here, insofar as people are interacting with government. And actually, so even for social history, it's a fantastic resource because, there are lots of reasons why people need to make contact with government, and you can sort of work out what's going on more broadly from government archives. So I think that process of archive collection, acquisition, is what makes this place so special, and things are well catalogued, and if you order something, it comes within 10 minutes, and so forth. So I'm astonished that more people don't use it. I'm astonished that more people in Bangladesh don't use it, and I'm astonished that more people who are interested in South Asia as well don't use it, and so people should.
Yes, I agree with you, because when I investigate for my research, I visited the Bangladesh National Archive, and I found lots of unpublished and published data from here, and that indeed very useful for my research. So I completely agree with you.
The range of things is astonishing, and basically anything that was in the district record rooms is here. So you have actually, there are Mughal land documents, right? So a lot of Richard Eaton's, really path-breaking work on the Bengal frontier in the 16th and 17th century came from materials that were here because they were collected from Sylhet and other kind of national archives. So
you are working on the global history, but as a Bangladeshi historian, I can confirm you that the curriculum or syllabus of the Bangladeshi University does not include this issue. Even before studying at Central European University at Budapest, Hungary, I had no idea about the term of global history.
So
do you think that Bangladeshi University should include the issue of global history in their syllabus?
Why? It should, 100%. I think, but global history, not in a glib way. I think global, in a sense, it just should include the history of other places, right, and how they interconnect. So I don't think you necessarily need to have a big narrative of sort of global history, but certainly the history of other societies across the globe, and to give students a sense of the broad outline in terms of time, what's going on in different global moments. For the simple fact that you can't understand the history of Bangladesh, or anywhere, not just Bangladesh, without understanding that sort of broader global context, whether it's the British Empire, whether it's kind of, political ideas in the early 20th century, whether it's kind of global economic forces, whether it's, whatever. All those things matter. And that's not to say that what matters in Bangladesh doesn't matter, of course, but it's the relationship between the kind of the local and the global that's important. And I think that's what I want to emphasize always in what I'm working on. I should say that the globalization of Bangladeshi history, I don't think Bangladesh is particularly unique in this respect. I think that there are history syllabuses, I think, across the world are often quite narrow. Most British universities, concentrate on European history. Unfortunately, I think there's a tendency to do that. So we have just, my department has just, and I'm very proud of this. We're just about to start teaching a new first year for undergraduates, which is where students do entirely global history. Well, they do. So they start in the kind of medieval period, and they have a first paper which is about medieval global history, and then they go up to the 20th century. And so, as I say, it's not about the globe as this separate thing from local national societies. It's about how you understand different processes occurring on a global scale, and that's fantastic. And we're the only university in Britain to do that. I think maybe SOAS has introduced something similar, but so I think that to kind of, I shouldn't, this is a global, the unglobal nature of global history of history is a global phenomenon, if you like. So it's similar that because the nation state has had such an extraordinarily powerful effect on our lives. But I don't think you can understand the nation state unless you frame it in that kind of global context. So anyway, any help I can offer to think about history in Bangladesh, but as part of a two-way conversation, because I'm sure there's people in Bangladesh that can help with this too.
Thank you, John, for joining with us.
Fantastic.
I hope that we will invite him again in the future. And we will know many things from him. Bye.
Thank you.